Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the September 7th, 2012 meeting of the Implementation Committee of the State Allocation Board. I'm Bill Savage. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer of the State Allocation Board, and happy to be here today. Let's go around the room and have everyone introduce yourselves and what organization you represent.
Eric Bakke, Los Angeles Unified School District.
Debbie Pearson, Small School Districts Association.
Joe Dixon, representing Cash.
Dennis Dunstan, Council of Educational Facility Planners.
Mary Morris, American Institute of Architects.
Dave Zan, OPSC.
Paul Hansen, representing county schools.
Lee Coop, California Association of School Business Officials.
Fred Yeager, Department of Education.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Appreciate everyone's time being here and giving us input today. So we're going to continue discussions of the project information worksheet, and we have a special guest today who wants to say a few words, and that's Lisa Silverman, the Executive Officer of the Office of Public School Construction. Lisa?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been here. No, I definitely appreciate the work that's been invested in, and definitely our efforts to try to get some great data for the project information worksheet. Two things I just want to cover briefly is, I know we've gotten a lot of feedback, and we definitely appreciate the feedback from those folks in the field that are definitely going to be having some impact on them. But for the most part, staff does have take their job very serious, and they do put a lot of effort in the items that they provide you and present. And ultimately, I know we may not have a grasp of the items initially how we draft it, but ultimately the goal is to get input. And, respectful of staff's efforts and time is definitely should be well received. And again, the goal is to get some positive and also some feedback shared with them on that level. So again, appreciate the opportunity that you have to honor that commitment from the committee members. So thank you again for that. The second item I just want to highlight is ultimately what the goal is. I know we start to venture off and try to get some really great data for the project information worksheet and expand it to the modernization program. I think We've had a great opportunity for the last 12 years, 14 years for the school facility program and have a great role and responsibility managing the program. We're partners. We're all partners together, and we're all committed. It's been quite a great run, $35 billion this program's received. And ultimately, we definitely have a small window of opportunity here. And the goal is to ultimately get some great data to highlight to the public, the taxpayers, to all our constituents out there, all the accomplishments of the MOD program. And I think that's really our focus here. So we definitely appreciate the input we're receiving, and we'd love to continue to work together, and again, ultimately with a goal of highlighting all the great things that we're doing in this program. So I appreciate the opportunity today, and welcome the feedback, and I appreciate, I'll just turn it over to Brian. But thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so a couple of things before we get started. Thank you very much, Lisa, for coming. We are going to have a meeting of the State Allocation Board on September 19th, and we'll have the first pass at the overall program review with the board members, potentially looking at all of the items that they have discussed in the past that they want to look at in relation to reviewing the school facilities program and any changes that might be made as part of an upcoming bond. So be sure to be there for that and to provide input. The calendar for our next meeting is Friday, October 12th. That's my birthday, so we'll be sure to have candles and the whole thing. So it'll be. That's yours too, and it's the day. Yeah, it's Mary's too. So okay, so it'll be a birthday Friday, and Lisa, yours is the day before.
That's correct.
Okay, so anyway. Okay, so
Who's going to bring the cake?
we'll figure it out. We'll take care of it. We can handle the logistics of the cake. Yeah, carrot cake, thank you. Okay. In November, we're proposing to move the meeting from the 9th on a Friday to Thursday the 8th to accommodate some schedule issues, and so put that down tentatively and we'll get that. I'm sorry, that's November. Proposed to be on Thursday the 8th instead of Friday the 9th. And I wanted to see, are there any comments from the public on items that are not on the agenda? You can comment on anything that is on the agenda at a future time. Hearing none, why don't we proceed? We're going to be talking again about, this is our third meeting on the modernization PIW, I think, and looking at some new ways to conceptualize how the process will flow that staff has with us, and as Lisa said, seeking input on what the best way is for us to get detailed cost information from districts regarding modernization projects and what level we want to go to, and we're looking for feedback from everybody on the committee about what the direction should be. So I want to turn it over to Brian Odell from OPSC.
Good morning. Just wanted to give a few seconds to talk about where we've been. Earlier this year, we started talking about ways to streamline the project information worksheet. We came up with some different ideas. We were going to prepare to address it to the board, but we were directed, no, the board wanted something that also captured information for modernization projects. So that's what we've been trying to do. We've had 3 different discussions, and prior, we've been very focused on what the actual worksheet would look like. And today's presentation in the entire item is focused not so much on what the actual worksheet would look like, what the columns, the wording of that, but rather what questions would we ask? We're envisioning more of an online worksheet, more of an online submittal process where a dialog box appears and it asks a question. Districts answer it, and it feeds into a table. So what we have here today is flowcharts, and possibly that the actual questions in the flowcharts would be what appears to the district to be able to fill out what the ultimate product will look like. Once we're more settled on the type of questions, how we want to gather the data, then the actual worksheet, the actual table, or whatever form it's going to look like will just flow. The formatting will just be there. But first we want to focus on what questions, what challenges that districts might have in completing those questions, if we can ask it in a different way, or give us some things to think about to try to brush it up. So if we turn to page 11, the slide there is titled Roadmap. So this is an overall view of how the process would go for the modernization. So once it's been indicated that this is a modernization project, it would start focusing on, okay, the computer system would just ask the questions relative to modernization. Some of the first pieces to the existing PIW is project funding, project cost, joint use info. We may have to revise some of those based on the other questions that we're going to get to in a few minutes. But if we get those questions nailed down first, I think it's just a matter of updating the other questions to see what's still logical to ask. It should be asked in the same way, or if we should change it. Then the district would come to basic school site and divisions of construction information. And we're just basic information. And then it would ask the question, does this project include building replacement? In other words, did the district demolish and rebuild an entire building? And if the answer is yes, then it would go to another series of questions that would ask just about the demo work. If the answer is no, then it would move over to project information for just the buildings that were modernized but not actually demoed and then completely rebuilt. And after that, it would just move on to the additional information section that's already on the PIW. So again, today we're just talking about the boxes that are in white, because those would be the new questions. And if we turn over to the next page, page 12, this is the first box, basic school site and type of work information. It asks the type of school, how many students currently attend the school, the estimated cost of work related for current American with Disabilities Act requirements. So I know this is something that we've talked about on a lot of different topics about some of the challenges, but we do want to start the conversation to see if, now that we're asking the question in a different way, you know, what information can we gather, because districts have been telling us that's a high cost to districts that oftentimes goes up and keeps increasing, and not relative maybe to the other funding that's being provided for a project. So the purpose of having question 3 is just to try to talk about what can we gather for the ADA. Is there anything that would work? Number 4, divisions of construction. So this is where we get to the dollar amounts. And what's currently listed in box 4 is the CSI divisions. And we were told that this is an industry standard, but we're also told that not all districts follow it. So we know that when we look at the Sailor publications, it uses these divisions, and some of the other bidding processes go back to these divisions. The goal here is not that we use these specific divisions, but rather to try to show that our hope is that we can gather some more specific project cost data, not per building, not all of the costs that are in the data. We're in the project. We've captured that on an earlier box, but just can we get some more relevant costs to provide to the public for some of these projects? And again, we're open to different types of ways of asking this question. This wouldn't be related to each building that we ask later on. This would be a standalone box. That's the current vision.
So
and we know that there would be a lot of costs that wouldn't be included in this too. The soft costs, for example, it's not trying to capture that because that's not the purpose of this.
Okay, so let's clarify a couple things. First of all, we're going to go ahead and submit on the first page of the PIW, you will have submitted the overall construction cost, the contract cost, and the other hard costs on that page, correct?
That's currently the way it's worded. Yeah, we could revisit that depending on what the result of all of these other questions that we ask, but currently for new construction, that's how it's asked, yeah.
Okay. And so, so this is taking that down to the level of what's inside the contracts for contract or contracts for construction, right? So we're asking for the information based upon what's in the construction contract for the entire project, not by building, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. It would be more big picture, not exactly how much did you spend for HVAC on building B versus building D. It's not trying to correlate the project scope information that we're capturing later on with this information.
Okay, so Eric and then Dennis.
Just a real quick, I just want to make sure I'm following along. So the form still is going to look like attachment B? Or are we talking about
It sounds like it's going to be a different form for modernization.
The questions on number 4, well, all of these would be if we go back to the roadmap on.
Well, I was just wondering if the new, how do I want to say this? So attachment C on page 12 of 18 will then be a new form. So the form that's currently on pages 7, 8, 9, and 10, is that right? Yeah, would all disappear?
No.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to figure out. What is actually...
I don't think that we're in the position yet to quite talk about what would happen, but my understanding is that this information on page 12 of 18, that's labeled attachment C, would be a part of what is currently the second page of the PIW, which is the project information section.
Well, I think if we look at page 11, the top box, project funding, project cost, joint use info, those are currently on the PIW. If the district indicates it's a mod project, it wouldn't go to the new construction questions. It wouldn't ask those because
Right.
we're
So there'd be
looking
a new
for something
page.
different.
Right, there'd
Yeah.
be a page that's the equivalent of what's page 8 of 18, which is the new construction page with project information on it.
Okay.
So what would drop down would be the modernization page for project information. And this is not the only part of that page that we're going to talk about, not to foreshadow, but
I'm just trying to get a sense, visualize
if you go
this
to
would look
any
like.
of the other pages, 13, 14, 15 of 18, those questions would also probably end up on a page related to modernization. If you put in a 57 prefix in the project number, then you would get dropped into the modernization chute and go into modernization pages with project information submitted, not the new construction page.
Okay, thank you.
Dennis?
Yeah.
On Section 4, you're not going to get accurate information on that. There's no way that you can get the breakdown of costs per division, CSI division. Even if you have a schedule of values, it's not going to be accurate enough. Your office in the past has said the schedule of values is not accurate enough to use for other methods. It's not accurate enough to use for this.
I've got another one, I'm sorry.
Lee?
Are we going to go through the whole, well?
Yes,
Are
we're
we-
going to go. We're
Okay,
going to
but-
continue. Let's focus on this, because this is not all of what the
Okay.
questions in terms of what is proposed to be asked in terms of information. But this is an area of discussion related to costs.
Okay, so I guess the process here. So we've switched from looking at, I guess maybe you're finding this roadmap process better, more effective, or you're trying that today at this meeting, instead of looking at actual questions,
I think
a
that-
draft form?
I think that the question, for example, if you look at number 2, how many students attend the school, that's what would pop up, and then the actual final version would just say students attending the school, and it would just fill into an actual table or a worksheet or whatever it would actually look like. Then the next question that would pop up would be, for the user, what would the estimated ADA cost? And that would fill a specific field. So when the district goes online, this hopefully is very much like what they would see, these types of questions, and then it would auto-populate or feed into however the data needs to be formatted for a report or something.
Okay.
So the table we talked about last month, we would revise that or update it based on the questions and feedback that we get today.
Okay, so just to clarify, so the first sheet is still attachment B. If you were a modernization project, you would still start with that, right?
Yes.
And then you'd start to go down, and at some point, it's not on here yet, the 57, right, would hit, and then you'd go into this new stuff that
Yes,
you're,
that's
okay,
correct.
all right. And so you wouldn't be on the next sheet, because that's new construction.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
Well, and I think there's also, as long as you're looking at the first page, there's probably also some question about whether we should clean up or reformat the project cost page on the section on the first page for modernization. A lot of those questions are not applicable, so maybe they don't appear if you're doing, for example, total cost for site acquisition.
Right.
It's not a relevant question for modernization. Maybe it just doesn't show up when you
Right.
when you put in the 57 prefix project.
It would-
You get the modernization project cost box that's on that page instead of the new construction. I don't think we've gotten there yet, but it's certainly the case that they're a little bit different.
Quick question, Bill?
Hold on, I think Eric had a follow-up.
No, he'll see.
You can go.
He yields his time.
Did we discuss last time to whom this applies?
You're asking about the universe?
We
Yeah, who
talked about
fills
that.
this out? There's no bond authority left. Your board's not approving applications. Who fills this out?
Okay, so let me make sure that you recall.
Well, I wasn't
Mr. Yeager.
part of that. So
Okay, so districts fill out the PIW. My understanding, after we've streamlined the proposed number of submissions, potentially, so that there's a submission at the time of fund release and at the end of the project.
for modernization.
There would be. So for the end of the project is actually a fairly significant universe hanging out there, in addition to which there's 900+ million in bond authority still outstanding, and $1 billion, Michael, help me out, of projects on the unfunded list that still haven't even been given cash. So there's $2 billion in that universe, and there's several other billion that still have to file final expenditure reports, which, as we've all noted in the past, are the most accurate PIWs. So it actually is a fairly substantial universe. I don't have a dollar figure for what the part that's already been funded and is being worked on and hasn't submitted a final 5005 is, but it's probably pretty significant in terms of dollar value. I don't know. I'd have to ask staff for that. I don't know how we'd get it exactly. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and that, well, we can talk as we go along.
Okay. Yes, Eric.
Thank you. I do want to start off by saying I know I've been difficult, maybe, with this particular process, but I do want to compliment staff for actually listening to the comments that have been raised and really working to try to streamline it. I think the original version was something at the nuts and bolts level, and now we're well at about the 10,000 foot level, which I think is helpful. I think it's providing the right level of information to tell what we've done. I still think we need to have that conversation about what still needs to be done, but that's for another day, and I understand that. But I think this is a very good step in the right direction. I do want to jump on what Dennis said with question number 4. If the target audience is going to be the general public, or let's not even include them in the conversation, just the folks in this building, they're really not going to understand or care that we spent, when you collect all this data, $700 million on concrete, $200 million on wood and plastics. It has no basis or relevance to them in terms of what we've accomplished. I'm not sure if there's a better way we can do that, and one of the things our school district has something called a strategic execution plan. It's a report. It's online, and afterwards I can send you the link. Every year it updates every mod project in our school district, the status of every building and every school site that we've accomplished. And in that, we don't tell our community how much concrete or the dollar values or anything like that. We just simply say, well, with the money we're going to spend, the projected budget for this particular school site is X. And then in X, we've done HVAC, repaired a lunch shelter, did some information technology wiring, did some re-roofing, repaired the plumbing, stuff like that. It's broad terms, not specific to masonry, concrete. I don't know how that works with every school district, but from a marketing and advertising standpoint, if you want to look at it from that, to have this information have value to more than just, the bean counters that are, geeks like us who focus on this stuff on a daily basis, to have value to the folks outside this room. I think it really needs to be put in common terms so that people understand what was actually accomplished. So if there's a way we can put a top 20 list of mod projects that were accomplished, I think would be probably more useful and more valuable. That would be my recommendation.
So are you talking about, for example, seismic upgrades?
Yeah, plumbing, roof replacement, HVAC.
And are you saying...
And then I think you can actually substitute having a third question for ADA by putting an ADA box in there maybe even. I'm not sure how we want to break that down even further, because that could be a subset.
Clarify your comments further?
Sure.
Okay, so are you saying that it makes sense to collect the cost information for each of those large categories?
What I do want to clarify is that it's going to be very difficult to take a lump sum modernization project. LA, the way we've done things is not typical of what every school district does. We did single project type mod projects. So I would submit 5 separate applications, each application doing a single task. So it's really easy for me to I'd submit a mod application. For just fire alarm safety sprinkler system. And then I'd submit a second modernization application the following year for, ADA, something like that. So it's really easy to pinpoint, and I can identify specifically what that cost was. But for a school district that's going to do a modernization that's going to have 20 different things, like if I did every one of these things on a single mod application, it's going to be really difficult, especially if it's a single task, one bid, lump sum. It's going to be really hard to pull out individual dollars from that. It's going to be really complicated. And since we're dealing at the 10,000 foot level now instead of at the ground level, I think it behooves us to kind of keep this form as simple as possible and allow some latitude and flexibility for the person who actually is filling out the form to have some latitude in determining what that percentage is and not really try to call them out and show, back up data at this point. I think it's helpful to realize that we know what the total cost was, Because that's being asked, I think. That's why I was asking earlier about what still
Yes,
is in play.
the district would input the total contract cost and all the soft costs.
So you're going to have that information, and then from with that, you're going to maybe have to ballpark percentages in a way to say, okay, well,
Right, so-
the plumbing work was 50% of the work.
So are you proposing a percentage-based approach? I mean, we talked about this a little bit.
I'm opening it up for I'm not sure what works best for everybody.
I mean, you're saying that that's one area, one way that you think you would do it, or you could envision it working.
I think so. I mean, in terms of how this will eventually, the end use of this, I think we have to kind of use that as our target and say, if it's going to be used to identify what work was done and how much money it is, if we already know what the total project costs and we turn in percentages, I think you can do the math real quickly and figure that out. This is my thought. I'm just throwing that out there for consideration.
Okay. Joe, did you, hold on. And then Lee after that. And then Dennis.
We did 24 modernizations. We started this summer, and we were funded in the December, appropriated last December, so we did the projects over the summer. And what we did in Santa Ana was we went after all the eligibility we could. So, for example, one school was $400,000 modernization project, and one school was $25 million modernization project. The point I'm trying to make is this: it's all over the board, and if we're gonna gather data on different types of construction, different eras of modernization, different scopes of work, and then try to break it down by division or schedule of values or whatever it might be, it isn't good information. I don't see how it could be helpful in any way at all. It's going to be, it could be skewed, and if we're giving it to the public, it could be embarrassing for some districts, perhaps. It's just not going to be an accurate reflection of what we do. And I don't know how you do that unless you can really drill down on every project, and somebody has to drill down on it. Could Santa Ana or LA Unified do that? Probably. The bigger districts can, but what about the smaller districts? You know, the people, how much is it going to cost to be able to drill down if you really want accurate information? And I would welcome OPSC. Come on down to Santa Ana, and let's go walk some projects, and let's go through all the stuff that we have so you can see what it looks like. And then maybe we can come up with a format that makes sense. But I'm looking at it, Brian, and it looks like a lot of good work, And I like the flow charts. But I'm just struggling with why, you know. I don't know. I'm just having a tough time with it.
I could respond real quick. We struggled with it too. That's why it went out so late yesterday. And we understand, in fact, if you look at attachment D, we also recognize that D, which is page 17, we also recognize that the divisions that are listed on box 4, the 16 of them, they've been expanded. Now there's over 50. So we understand that there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different kinds of projects, different ways that the information is collected. And the reason we presented this, what we're looking for is there anything that would work? I think this feedback really helps all of us, because we're looking for something that is the easiest way for districts to fill out that does get us something there. And we're trying to find something so that when we report back to the board, we can explain accurately exactly what the board would be approving and some of the challenges that districts may face, or what we were able to find. Maybe there is something out there that we just haven't thought about yet.
Well, for example, my $400,000 mod, if you throw that into the mix as a percentage of here's how much modernizations cost, you know, the scope of work is developed to meet the budget. Okay, so it's not equal to if we had full eligibility at the site. Some of the eligibility was used up previously, is what happened here. So it's difficult, and I bet that's more common than we think. I think a lot of districts capture eligibility when they have matching funds or whatever, So it could be all over the place as well. I don't think it's unique, that's for sure. But
I think we recognize that whether a district has drained all of the eligibility or only used part of it, that doesn't mean that 100% of the school is perfectly modernized to exactly where the district or the state would like. We completely understand that, and later on, as we go through some of the other slides, that's kind of what it speaks to. But as far as the cost, we're hoping to get something, if it's at all possible, that allows districts without having to be a large district with much more resources to be able to fill something out, to give us a little more specific project cost data, not necessarily to say, therefore, this is what it costs to modernize a school, or therefore, this is what some other type of hypothetical situation. The goal is just to be able to report to the public, we have $35 billion in bonds, such amount went to modernization. Of the PIWs received, these are some of the things that are shown. That's really our goal. And I know we're certainly not married to the divisions in CSI. I know we're definitely willing to, in fact, I think Tuesday morning, Box 4 looked very different. So just so you know, we're,
It's true.
we're not married to anything. We're really looking for something that gets us there as best we can, and we do want to hear all of the challenges that you're going to face with filling it out.
So let's talk about, one of the other things that, so if you look at box 3 for a second, part of the issue here, and one of the things that I think OPSC is trying to capture, is for box 3, districts receive a supplemental grant for ADA. So I think part of the interest is probably to say, okay, we gave you a supplemental grant, and if you take the high road and say, really the question is, was it enough? Report your actual costs so we can all look at it and see if it's enough. Right? So I assume that that's part of the interest here in terms of box number 3. Would you say that's true, Brian, in
I would
one
say
way?
that's a
part
piece
of
of it. Part of it, though, is to recognize that the ADA work is dispersed with all of the other things that districts have to do. So we, if it's possible to lump it in with all of these other things, that's certainly. But we've also heard that it's so dispersed. We were trying to keep it separate because we recognize that when you do masonry work or concrete work or other types of things, you're going to have how much it costs to do one thing, and the ADA would be a piece of it. Now, we've also heard that it's very difficult to break that out, but we did want to talk about that and see if there's some way that this type of information can be reported so that we have it, because we do think it would be very useful to the public.
Okay. I'm sorry, did I miss you before? Yep. Okay, go ahead, Lee. Hold your fire.
Thank you, Bill. So just that in general, I would agree with Eric on a lot of what he's saying. I still go back to what is the purpose of this, and Brian, you said the purpose of it is for the public to be able to look on a website and see this. So I see these divisions of construction not useful at all, and I'm wondering why. I think we've spent the last 3 meetings kind of talking about that and explaining to staff why this is pretty much impossible to get at accurately, and then here it is again. So I'm just wondering, what is there's some kind of push that we're not aware of or something, because we keep saying we can't get to this information. It's pretty impossible for most districts doing a lump sum low bid situation to get to this easily and have it be accurate. So that would be one thing. And then the percentages would also be sort of inaccurate as well, because you'd have to have the numbers to do the percentages. And then the other thing is, I'm still confused about, from last time we talked on attachment C, and there were graphs, and we talked about type of facility, number of classrooms, years since building was last modernized. Will this building require?
Stay tuned. It's coming.
Okay. Is that still part of it?
It's coming.
Okay. So I think that's more useful, and kind of what Joe was saying is that we had that question about, I think districts pretty much understand, are we kind of only doing a minimal modernization because that's all we had eligibility for, and we're not supplementing it with our own funds, which is what many districts do beyond the match. and then there was a simple question that could say, no, we're doing a more extensive modernization. And that, I think that can help get information to the public better. Like, okay, like if people are worried about, if Joe reports he has a $400,000 modernization project, somehow that information is going to get out there that that's all it costs for that school to be modernized. That's what he's worried about. Mm-hmm. And so if you could check and say that's a minimal modernization, and we're still going to do some more work, I still think that has a lot of validity and ability to take that concern away. That would be important. And then, let's see. Oh, and then the ADA thing, definitely, Brian, what you're saying, it would be difficult to have both of those questions. You'd be doubling up on costs. But I'm just in favor of just getting rid of question 4. Maybe even question 3 needs to be reworded, but question 4 is just, I don't think it's useful, and I don't think it will be accurate at all.
Bill?
Yeah, hold on. We've got a couple of people ahead of you, Mr. Yeager. So, Mary.
Thanks. Well, I wanted to start by saying I think the flow chart exercise is a good one, in that what we are doing here is trying to figure out what are the proper questions to ask. That's the place we need to be working. And then I'd like to second, Eric's stated that earlier, is what we're trying to get at is what is useful information for the public to know. How are they going to evaluate this? And they're not going to do it by saying we spent $2 million on wood and plastics. That's not a useful question, and not even in that level of breakdown. It's a much broader categorization, I think, that they're going to be interested in. And then a specific comment about question number 3 is the amount you would like anyone to fill in for the ADA grant. Is it what DSA is agreeing to as what we spent on ADA, or is it what we actually think we spent on ADA? Because those are two very different numbers, I can tell you.
I think just conceptual, just overall, I know there's other comments, but with the PIW, we're looking for actual costs.
Yeah, and I want to second that too. Brian said it accurate. I mean, the whole point of the PIW is for the state to gather pieces of information that the state does not have. So the state may have your cost estimate and what DSA said and your 5004 and all the other stuff that comes with that for your funding, but the state does not have your actual contract costs and your actual soft costs. And so that's the purpose of gathering this information. I think what we're talking about here is sort of how deep do we go and what's the usefulness
so
of
the
data.
contract cost and the soft cost is the form work, then, is the question you ask, if that's the information you want. You don't want to know how much we spent on wood and plastics.
Okay. Dennis? And then
If we could go back, Eric mentioned looking at this from the 10,000-foot level, and I think one of the things that we've discussed in the past that, if just glancing through this morning, that I still see as missing is the existing condition of the facilities. If this is going to be both a report to the general public on how the funds were used and a report to the legislature on the adequacy of the grants, that's one key element that really needs to be in there. If you have facilities, even if they're eligible for modernization, but they're in good condition, the money is going to be spent differently, and the amount of money that's needed is going to be different than if you have facilities that are 25 years old that are in poor condition. And there's nothing in this that I've been able to see that really addresses the adequacy of the facilities.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
A lot of this is difficult, and as Brian said, we've struggled with it a lot, mightily. And we hear you. We have looked at these costs, and we are trying to provide meaningful information to the taxpayers, to the decision makers, whatever, if they look at, what has the $11 billion been spent on. So we've had different versions of lists of things, and we've kind of vacillated and gone back and forth. And we kind of struck on this latest version here, and I think we're hearing that maybe it's not useful. And you can look at it, and you can see there's a few things here that may be useful, but yeah, metals, wood and plastic, thermal and moisture protection, doors and windows, yeah, people would understand what that is. There's a few here that they would understand, but, again, our intent here was to try to go to something that you guys are already using out there, generally using. So that was why we took this approach, and I'm not trying to justify it, and again, as Brian said, we're not wedded to it necessarily, but if this is something that's used out there, if we could use it and perhaps maybe package it into, I'm going to channel Eric here for a second, meaningful information. Could we maybe group these things? The translation for this categories 3, 4, and 5 as an example mean you did X, and you could say X. Is that an approach we could take here? Because again, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to create a new sub-process here that creates a lot of work for you guys. We're really, our intent here is really to streamline and get information that's already out there. And we thought this was something that is readily used out there by, you folks. And so I don't know, can you translate this? Or what's a better way of doing it? And that's really what we're here for today.
Fred?
I heard two things, that Brian was talking about, this is information for the public, and then I also heard information for people who make decisions about this, which were probably two separate things with two separate needs. Information for the public, I go on my sam1.edu page and see what they're doing. And didn't in the LPP you have to put a sign in front saying the state is involved in this? Most districts, even the small districts, have web pages that update a facility project. And it will define the scope as windows, doors, whatnot. And it could say the state contributed $200,000 to this $10 million project or whatever it is. That, I think, would solve the what did we people get for this. Now, that's different than what does modernization cost, and if that's the question the decision maker folks need to know, maybe that's a different tool that's approached in a different way.
Okay, hold on just a second. Did you have a comment, Mary, on?
I was going to give a little bit of an answer to Dave's question about whether or not we use this information. And during the course of design, oftentimes cost estimates are prepared using that kind of information. But that's not how the contractor then shares his actual costs with us. So we can use more or less that format during the preparation, but once you get a bid, that information is useless. It's trash in terms of being realistic and relevant about what things actually cost. So it's no longer, it's not a format that a contractor reports back to us in.
Yes, Paul?
I'm a little concerned with Dennis's comment about adding more to the worksheet and with it tracking existing facilities, making existing facilities assessments. That, to me, would cost a lot of time to do, be very difficult to translate. I am also happy with staff that they went through the flow charts. They make a lot of sense to me. Of course, nobody really wants to have to go through this exercise at all, but we realize it's becoming a necessary evil. As far as question number 4, there are 4 categories that I see that may be able to be broken down on a percentage basis like Eric suggested, and that's the 4 divisions of the state architect: access compliance, structural, life safety, and other. So if we could break it down into...
Other? I know.
But really, I mean...
Yeah, I got it.
I mean, as far as reporting back to the public and what did you do with the modernization, do they in that other category, do they really care too much about it? But if they hear you're spending 33% of your project on access compliance, or if you're spending 100% on structural, these are kind of interesting statistics, I would think. And those would be the categories that I would suggest.
Okay, and I was only making light of the other category, which could be pretty large in some, and you can get me later. I know you will, but let me say that, so that's an interesting idea, right? Because the governing agency that checks our plans uses 4 broad categories. So there's an idea. Is it a good idea? I don't know, but thank you for an idea. Okay? I know. Go ahead. Eric, did you have a comment?
I just think that we've got a great opportunity here, and to try to use this, when this first started, I was very opposed to it because I thought it was unnecessary information. The types of questions that were being asked were really not going to provide any value. Now we're here at this stage, and I think where we're at is we're at a level it can provide some good information about what we've accomplished. And I think to Paul and Dennis's point, and I briefly said it earlier, I think there's a second step that we have to undertake and go through, and it's something that we cannot do in this format. It's a long conversation about facility condition index. It's something that's probably going to have to be done in terms of another bond. It's just not something that's going to be handled here today or anytime soon. But in the meantime, where you're at in trying to demonstrate what value the existing program has had is important. It'll help since we no longer are filing applications to be processed anymore, unfortunately. We need other tools to demonstrate value and need in this program. This is a good opportunity to do that. And so I think we should spend some time in trying to figure out, what we've done and how we've done it. The more I've listened to everyone, I'm not exactly sure spending a lot of time on percentages or dollar values on individual types has a lot of value. I think it's more important that we understand what we've done versus to the detail what we've done. In terms of, I replaced my roof. Great. I don't need to know that I spent $200,000. I think right now, step one, it's good to know what we've done. Step two, after we've kind of adopted and adapted to this new process, maybe we can start looking at maybe adding another question or two under the new program to try to kind of get a better sense of what things are doing up and down the state throughout the counties. Maybe it's not necessary at this stage. I'm just thinking about that. Maybe it's important to understand what type of work we've done versus to the degree or the dollar value we've done it.
Okay, further comments? Mary had one, and Joe. Deborah, did I skip over you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would like to come back to that issue that Eric just mentioned. And it seems to me we're trying to develop one form that answers two different questions. And one question is for the public, and they want to know basically, what did I get for my money? They don't want to know that the roof costs $200,000. They want to know I got a new roof. But then there's a different constituency, perhaps, seems like, from what I'm hearing anyway, that wants to know how much does it cost to do modernization. And that's that next level of detail. And if that question isn't really on the table, then we don't need to do any of this cost breakdown stuff. We just need to have a list of, I spent $12 million and I did X, Y, Z, A, B, C, whatever, without a breakdown of those costs, which are quite hard to come by.
Okay, why don't we go to Deborah, who's waited patiently. Thank you.
So unlike me, I know. Well, first of all, it's not talking, I'm going to go back to Joe's comment, smalls can track this too. They don't have a million projects, they usually have one, maybe two. So that's not too much of an issue. But the other thing is, I know I haven't been here for a while, and I've kind of forgotten, or maybe I just put it out of my mind, but yeah, I really have blacked it out. So, Eric, I kind of don't remember exactly why our charge was for this, but I think if you're really after accurate information, and I think I said this before, it needs to be done at the very end. If that's what we're after on what the actual costs were. As far as number 4, I agree with Mary. I think if you need that stuff, I don't think people really care how much you spent on specialties and furnishings. I think you do an F&E, you do, the big ones, a roof, the ADA. And I think folks will be very interested to see how much money is spent on ADA upgrades when it is such a small percentage of what needs to be done. I mean, in my opinion, you spend a lot and too much money doing that when you could be doing other things would be more beneficial. But I just got off on a tangent, sorry.
Okay. Does anybody, did I skip over you?
No, that was Deborah's turn.
Okay, so Joe, Dave, and Lee. Okay.
You know, we could, besides ADA, why don't we throw in fire and life safety? Why don't we see what that costs? Because I'm putting sprinklers in places you wouldn't
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah.
And I'm putting smoke detectors on outside breezeways. So maybe we, sorry, all kidding aside, local districts have a lot of work to do to get a project started and accomplished. Every time that we get more work like this, it costs money, and it costs us money, which ends up costing the whole state and all the taxpayers money. We're talking about, and I think Eric might have brought up, like a facility condition index. That's something we're talking about that the state really needs, and I think we all agree with it, because decisions should be based on good data. This, you know, we're doing for projects now. We're doing all kinds of reporting. We just this year had added the DIR CMU piece that adds a lot of work to districts. This adds more work to districts. It just keeps piling up and piling up. And so maybe we ought to take a comprehensive look at everything we're doing and see where the value is. I'm still back to I don't know what the value will be. You can do an ADA breakdown of my $400,000 project and not see anything on it. So does that skew the data? That's just one example.
Wait, say that again?
Well, on the, you know, you're going to get an ADA number on some modernizations that, you know, it wasn't part of the scope of work, perhaps, you know? I mean, and then if we have to, sometimes even in a multiple prime bid where you could have different trades, we package it together to be able to get the best price possible. So let's say it's plumbing and concrete, perhaps. You know, we'll have that package go out as a multiple prime. You know what I mean? You don't look like you know what I mean, but
I know what you mean.
Okay. So, but that's you know, you work with your architect and you figure out, you know, this is a small scope, so let's put these three things together when we bid it. So then we'll have to break it out for anyway. It's a lot of work. Accuracy would be a huge question for me. And let me ask the architects a question. Don't you have a per square foot cost for modernization that you use? Like just a ballpark kind of, you know, here's how much it costs?
Highly dependent on scope.
Yeah, and dependent on the existing conditions.
Okay.
And what the owner's like.
Existing condition issue. Okay. Anyway, I'm still struggling with it, to be honest with you.
All right, Mr. Zian.
So we're struggling with it too, and help us. But I want to address a couple things. I think a lot of taxpayers, I'm a taxpayer, want to know. I spent $500,000 on roofing. I think a lot of taxpayers do want that information. So I'm just going to say that. I can go on, but I think that a lot of the taxpayers are educated and do want the finite details. Others, yeah, you're right, aren't going to give a care. They're just going to want to know plumbing and HVAC or whatever. But I think a lot of them out there do want that information. As far as the cost information, I just want to spend a second here. I know I've heard a lot, there's difficulties. I think we understand there are difficulties. That's why we're here today to seek input from you folks on what the best way to do this is. And also I want to redirect that, are we asking the right questions? And we're trying to get that too. Hopefully we're asking the right questions or on the right track on some of these. But as far as why we need the dollar values per these building types, these building categories that we're talking about here, and again, we're not locked in anything, is if we just know that there was HVAC and there was roofing and there was doors and windows, you don't really have enough information. I don't think the taxpayers have enough information, or the decision makers have enough information without the dollar values attached to it. You don't have any order of magnitude. You don't know, if you say roofing, you know, and it affected 10 different buildings. Remember, we're not getting into the cost per building. We're just asking what's the aggregate dollar value for these XYZ building component types of work that you did. But, you know, if it's just a small dollar value for HVAC, it's irrelevant then. You got to have the dollars to have the scope information. So I'm just trying to share with you what we're struggling with here. That's our main struggle here is you need the scope. We need to know what was done in these buildings for MOD because they're existing buildings. These buildings are already here. We want to know what was done in it. And then the next thing is the dollar value associated with it. And we do believe that the constituents out there do want that discrete information. So,
Lee.
I just added a bunch of stuff now from what Dave said. Okay, so sure, I think that there are taxpayers that would want that kind of information. It's a minority. It's people who are, and I'm not saying geeky, but people who are in construction or people who have an agenda. Who say, I'd say a taxpayers association, $500,000 on a roof, that's way too much. That's more than what I spent on my house. And we get that all the time, right?
Sure, we do
okay,
get it all the time.
so then you need a level of detail of narrative or whatever it is to explain that, or why a door at a high school costs a lot more than your front door at your house. And so that takes some nuance and narrative, which I'm not recommending that we put into this. But that's the reason why we're concerned. So that would be one thing. The second thing is, and I can't go over this enough, we can't get that information accurately. I'm not sure if OPSC folks, I think Joe's on the right track, come to a school district and look at all the bid documents. Look at how the contractors give us the information, like what Mary said. They don't give us that information. So you are creating more work. It doesn't exist. It exists in some districts that break it out, that do specific projects, or for me, at least leaseback. Sometimes I can get to that by trade, but there's a lot of work that would have to be done so that you're not double counting and all that, and that simply does not exist easily at all. And you would be creating more work. So your explicit mission of not creating more work or any of that, or not reinventing the wheel, I think you said, or not having to pull more information out that doesn't already exist. This doesn't exist in this form. So for most districts, it does not exist. I like the idea, though, of what's the total project cost with soft and hard costs, which you have on the other page, and then just the checklist, which we talked about previously, the checklist of what the scope was. And that's it. Just the main categories that people can understand, that the legislators could understand, that the public could understand. Did I do HVAC? They don't even know what HVAC is. Did I do air conditioning and heating? Yes. Did I do a roof? All that. All those main categories that we talk about all the time on a website, like what Fred said. And again, I just think it would be really important for OPSC staff to take a look at the documents that, not that what you ask already for, but look at bidding, look at bid documents, look at how we get the costs back. And maybe that would help, inform how this goes. I'll just throw in something that I got this week from OPSC, and it was new to me. It was a closeout letter from OPSC saying, project is successfully closed out, thank you very much, it's all good. Except that the language now says, you overspent on this project by X. What? You overspent on this project by X amount of money. Well, it was my contribution over and above, because I report that on my SLOBE. No, what is it? Not SLOBE. What's the DLOPE. I don't know what SLOBE is. DLOPE. I put an S instead of a D. The DLOPE. I report everything. So it's the total project, but not every district does that. So because they had that, I now was told I overspent on a modernization project. This is the concern that districts have, because now that letter is out there. It went to my superintendent. Lee, what do you mean you overspent on this project? I'm going to have to explain to him, this is our local GO bond. Of course, this was the modernization project. Mr. Superintendent. So that's where we're concerned that all of a sudden the expenditures get in there, and then that little word is going to cause me a lot of problems for the next months, years. whatever that is. And I'm just saying that's a little example of how this information can get a little bit misinterpreted. The nuance isn't there, and that's why we're concerned, because the detail isn't included.
Right, and that's probably not on topic, but it is a good point. Those kinds of terms, I'm not sure OPSC understands this, but they get those when that information gets to people who are on your bond oversight committee or are member of taxpayers groups, then they come back and they say, well, look, the state said you overspent, and therefore, you're wasting resources. So anyway, we'll just stop on that one right now. But it's a very interesting one. Mr. Odell, further comment on.
You
want to get us back to work?
I can't speak to what the
wording
Brian, is on letters in a different part of the shop, but one of the things that I was interested in is, Lee, you talked about the bid documents and the way that the data is collected. Is there a uniform way of how districts receive that information? So if we went to one or two districts, I'm just throwing it out there, would we be able to say that's typical of how the information is presented, or is it very different from district to district, or is it delivery method? However the information is received or tracked by school districts, because that's the industry standard. That's what we're trying to get at. What already are districts using? Is it dependent on the size of the? So it depends on the delivery method. That depends on how some of these costs or categories are tracked. Is that okay? Not 100% of the time, but the vast majority. So we have different delivery methods, because this is a type of information that kind of helps us to understand how to get there. So now if we know it depends on delivery method, not that it's going to be 100% of the time, but within that, what were some of the categories that we thought that, well, the 16 don't work? So I heard ADA, fire life safety, HVAC, roof. What are some of the other categories that A, we think people would be interested in, B, districts do collect in some way, maybe not the same way every single project, but if we could start with that, I think that might help us to get down to where do we go from here, if it's at all possible.
Paul?
Well, I had just the four categories there of fire life safety, access compliance, structural, and other, and I'd be willing to add high performance. How about that?
Well, we already collect that somewhere else.
Now you've got 5, and that would include roofs, insulation, thermal, windows and doors.
Okay.
So there you go. Now you have 5 categories.
I'll add one.
Yes, sir.
Well, so your educational improvements, creation of more science labs to do STEM, reconfiguration of existing spaces.
That's educational enhancements. We had that on last time. Remember? That's a category.
We were told that most of it is for educational enhancements, that people would get confused that there was roofing done that was not done for educational enhancements, because it wasn't part of that category.
But
I'm with you, but that's what we were told last month.
But whether a leaky roof on a nice science room, that there are things other than the renewal of the physical structure. There are opportunities to change structure, interiors to accommodate the program. So.
I think it's a good category too. There were more comments over here before we go back to Lee? Yes, sir.
Just in terms of, all due respect, Paul, it would be very difficult to break costs out in terms of structure, the structural elements. I mean, they're an integral part of the overall design, and it'd be difficult to do that. But I go back to, I think, what Lee was saying, and that is, I don't necessarily have a problem with the list that is in category 4 here. The list. The problem that I have is with trying to break out the costs. If this was turned into a checklist and say we did this, 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 and this, and the overall cost was so much, that would make a lot more sense to me than trying to break out the individual costs, because the breaking out the costs would be in some cases very misleading. If we go back to the case of the roofing, I mean, you could put built-up roofing on for I don't know, $200,000, or you could go to a single-ply roofing with integral photovoltaics, which some
spend more
districts
on.
have done, which could be 10 times that cost, and just having roofing so much on there would be very misleading. So I don't see the necessity in breaking that down. I don't think the districts use the information broken down, and I think just having the checklist with a total cost would be more efficient.
So when you get, and I'm just trying to understand to make sure I'm hearing, an invoice comes in for, I'll say $1 million. It's not broken out based on roofing or HVAC, and if not, how
Schedule of
It's schedule
values
of
is
value.
broken out.
schedule of value.
And-
And it's broken out, as I think we talked about during the staff meetings on this. It's typically formatted by the contractor, not the district, and it's based upon how they conceptualize the performance of the work, and it's often based on the schedule structure for the job and the types of buildings and the different work areas, and so then they bring that through in terms of how they visualize the job, they provide the information. So in order to get it, as we talked about, I think before, in order to get it into the categories that are on Division 4, the divisions, you would have to take the spreadsheet that you get and do the math on each. You'd have to summarize all the categories and potentially take different buildings and site work areas and put them in. So it's a lot of work, that's all.
So if we throw out all the questions in 4 and focus on the schedule of values, that's not uniform? It's different based on all the other things that we were talking about?
Not uniform.
So we have things broken out by schedule of value for each project, but the way that schedule of value is organized varies greatly from one project to another depending on delivery method, and is it correct to say depending on the way the contractor chooses to organize it?
Yes,
Is that,
unfortunately it is. We've
Okay,
had districts that I've worked in and construction management firms have tried for centuries,
because
contractors to do them all the same, and they won't, because what you're doing is whenever you tell a contractor to do something a certain way, then you pay. Because when they do it their way, they'll do it for the bid price. But if you tell them to restructure it and change the way they conceptualize the job, then they want more money. This is in a low bid scenario, and so that's really one of the issues.
Another part to that, Brian and other folks from OPSC, new construction makes sense because it's going to be apples to apples. You're building everything new. But let's use Dave's example of HVAC. Some projects you're going to have to modify the curb on the roof, let's say, so that adds cost. Some you might not. Some you might change the ductwork or the classrooms down below get reconfigured, so you have to balance it differently. So there's just so many variables. So besides how you break out the schedule of values, each project on a modernization is different. It's inherent. Schools, architects have been designing them different every 10 years. They come up with some new
Blame it on the
idea
architects,
that
Joe.
changes everything. I always blame the architects. But anyway, the point is this. The PIW for new construction is apples to apples because it's all new stuff, basically. Modernization, it's just everything's different. You're going to have you couldn't give the public and the taxpayer, and I agree with Dave. Taxpayers do want to know costs, but we have to be careful. We have to be careful that it's accurate. And I'm still struggling on that accuracy because of what I just said. It's every modernization is different. Every cost is different.
Okay.
And I'll leave it at that.
On that note,
I'm going to go
we're
call
going
my
to take
attorney.
a 5-minute break, and we'll be back. Okay, now we're all refreshed, and I think I think we've probably gone about as far as we can go in terms of the feedback from the committee on the page 12 of 18. However, I am remiss in that we haven't asked for comments from the public, if there are any, and so let's do that on this specific item, please, and then we'll move on. Okay? Yes, sir. They're here.
Okay, Ron Pregman, just with WLC Architects, just a couple. First of all, nobody addressed in number 2, we're talking about students that attend the school, but shouldn't we have a subcategory in there that says something about students in the project? Because you're getting a missed number in there if you're not doing the whole school.
Well, I think it's actually a good point. So remember, in the first page of the PIW, or as a part of the information that the state already has on the 5004, they know how many pupil grants are behind this request for funding, correct? So we know how many pupils.
We
I think
know how many
do-
pupil grants are requested, but we do recognize that that doesn't necessarily translate into how
Totally
many actual
understand.
pupils.
And,
So,
but I think maybe it's a good point. So, for example, one subset would be, if you're only doing a building, how many of the kids are in that building? And I think maybe the question is more like the question that's already on the second page of the PIW for new construction, which is number of pupils served. Right? If you look at page 2 on the PIW for new construction, that's how it's formatted. But that has it broken down by grades currently. So, a good point.
Okay, and the other, go ahead, the other question I had, this goes along with what Eric says, and at the risk of being flippant here, it's kind of like somebody asked for the time, and we're telling them the history of building a watch. I mean, I really think you need to keep it as simple as possible, and how much are we spending per student or something, or the categories that were brought up, which
Sure.
I mean, I can understand the relevance of trying to get down into the weeds here, but really, who is going to look at that? I think it's more important in general that the public knows what we're spending, or what the aggregate is, or maybe what we spent and what's still out there, if that's what we're trying to get at.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. We missed you, Ron, so keep it up.
Bill? real quick.
Yes, sir.
To the point about the question about the number of students attending a school, the concern I have with identifying the number of pupils on a mod project is that I can submit 3 or 4 mod projects separately for the same wing, and they're just going to get constantly recounted over and over again. I just think it's just easier from a management and, administering this program, keeping it as simple as possible. We just recognize the number of kids that are attending the school at the school site, because otherwise you're just going to duplicate the numbers over and over again. I just don't think it's worth the headache trying to parse out every previous application.
Okay, and I think it's an interesting question. So we haven't talked a whole lot about this internally in terms of preparing the item, but one of the things that does happen when you start to analyze this data is it's very common to have to look at more than one PIW for a school to get an understanding of the work and the whole picture. I mean, your school district is famous, in fact, for that. So, in fact, they write on their comment sections on the PIW, LA Unified does, when you analyze this data, you must look at application number, PIW for application number X, Y, and Z, in addition to this, in order to get a true listing of the cost. So I think understanding how the students are reported and not double counting them, I think it's important, and it has to do with the way that you look at the data, the way that you try and integrate multiple PIWs that come from the same site, et cetera. So, yeah, point well taken. Okay. So I think we've heard a lot of good feedback on attachment C and page 12. Brian, why don't you, maybe you should go back to the flow chart and lead us from the flow chart into where we would go. And so, is that okay? Do it that way?
Sure. I'd be happy to.
Go to those places.
So a district goes online. They just want to fill out a PIW. Well, they fill out a PIW for a mod. Asks the first question. The first page that comes up: project costs, joint use info, if relevant, things like that. Then it goes to that page that we were talking about, which is overall project data. How many students are in the school? Some of the project costs that we've been talking about. Once that's completed, then you click next or something like that, and the question would come up: does this project include building replacement? In other words, did the district demolish and rebuild an entire building? And then there would be a yes or no. So if we turn to page 13, that's where we would get if you said yes and there was a building that was demolished. So the first question would be, what was the name of the building that was replaced? And the reason that's asked for is so that it can help populate the rest of the project information worksheet, so that we can kind of keep track of all of the buildings, not on the school site, but just within the worksheet itself. What was the building used for? Check all that apply. So it was an admin, and it had maybe some other library, or maybe it was all classrooms or a gym, whatever is applicable to that building. Then it would ask how many classrooms were in the building. 0, 5, whatever the number is. Then the question would be, what was the construction type? So was it portable, modular, masonry, steel, wood, other? And you would check all that apply in case it's mixed. We'd be able to capture that. How many stories was the building? So this is what you demolished. It was a 1-story, 2-story, whatever it was. Then you click next. What was the original year that the building was built? So then we can get an idea of districts are demolishing buildings that are 50 years old, 75 years old, or whatever the number is. Then what was the total square footage of the building? Click next. Why was the building replaced? And then check one, the primary reason. So we understand that there could be multiple reasons, but just if you had to pick one, what would it be? And one of the answers could be educational need. So it was torn down, it had to be moved to another part of the site. That we understand that that's what districts are doing. And then the next would be continue to the next page to enter information about the new building. So we have what did you tear down? Okay, we have some basic info for that. Click on next. We go to page 14, and now it's so what did you build? So what is the name of the new building? What is the building used for? Check all that apply, same type information. How many classrooms are in the building? What is the construction type? How many stories are the building? And what is the total square footage of the building? And then ask the question, was the building replaced by more than one building? So we start to get to the idea of you tore down a big one and you built 2 small ones, or vice versa, or whatever the combination is. If the answer is yes, then you would go back and fill out the same questions for the other building that you've replaced the one that you tore down.
And you'd keep doing that until you got to the end?
Until you finally say no. You know,
Okay.
was it more than one? You'd say no more. I guess there needs another one all done. Which, how many more buildings? There you go.
Let's wait. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's a good point. That needs to be fixed. If there was other modernization work, then continue to the next page. If there was not other mod work, so all you did was like for like basically, then you wouldn't go on to the next page. But if you said yes, then you would go to, okay, so you did work where you didn't actually replace the whole building, you just did pieces of it. And that's pretty much what we've been talking about for most of the morning. We did roofing on a bunch of different classrooms, but we didn't tear any of them down. We also did HVAC on some other parts, and we did some painting and some other things. So if that's the information that we're ready to enter, the first question is...
Well, hold on, let me interrupt you, but wouldn't the most normal route to page 15 of 18 be if you answered no to building replacement and said yes to modernization?
Once the worksheet has
Yeah.
either collected all the like for like, or it knows that there is no like for like, then you would come to 15. So yeah, so that's a good point. So if you just said no, we didn't do any like for like, then this is immediately where you would come from, and you wouldn't have to deal with the other questions.
Because probably for the large majority of projects, they would get to this page for modernization of a building rather than the replacement. Okay.
Good point. And that's one of the advantages of doing the online application, is that you don't have to look at the parts that aren't relevant. Just focus
Although,
on the
let's
parts
keep
that are relevant.
reminding everybody on the committee that we will have to look at all of the parts together when we do the form that will be part of the regulation. So it'll look more complicated.
That's true. We will have to include all of those parts for OAL to review. However, this flow chart is the vision of what districts would actually experience when
Mr. Odell, Mr. Bakke asked if you'd have a fully ready form next month.
Define fully ready.
Draft, I think, yeah. Okay, never mind. Keep going.
That's our goal, is to have something to share as soon as we can. Again, we want to nail down as best we can what the actual questions are, and then the worksheet just flows. So if the district is ready to fill out the information for HVAC, building, whatever was done. The first question is, what is the name of the building? And there wouldn't be a lot of rules about what you have to enter. So it can be a word, it can be a C-101 Elm Gym, whatever the actual name that the district refers to it. The idea is just for tracking purposes. It becomes more obvious later on the next slide why we would want that. But just so that districts can keep track of what building they're answering the questions for. Okay, so what is the building used for? Check all that apply. It's the same list that we've looked at. Is it a gym, classrooms, admin, library, those types of things? Then how many classrooms were modernized as part of this project in the building? So it wouldn't be every mod project that you've ever done. It would be just this specific application or worksheet. Which classrooms have you, or how many classrooms have you touched for this building? What is the construction type? Same as before. Enter the number of stories for this building. What is the original year that the building was built? When was this building last modernized? You'd enter the year. Enter the total square footage for this building. Enter the square footage modernized in this building as part of this project. And then what type of work was done in the building? And that's where we get more detailed about the actual scope. Some of the things that we've been talking about this morning. Well, you've done multiple things on some of the buildings, but maybe only one thing on other parts of the building. So if we look over to page 16, that's the types of work. So what work was done, you would have a drop down, or not a drop down, probably more something more like another box that pops up where you can just start checking all that you've done. You did site work, you did roofing, HVAC, whatever was relevant to what you've actually done. And then the next, so after you've done that for this building, it say what further work needs to be done to this building. And then it says, if known. So if you're not sure, or the person filling it out doesn't have that information, the district isn't certain yet because there's a lot of things that are up in the air, it wouldn't be a required field. But if it's known, if they're marching along in the plan, then districts would have the ability to fill that out. And the next question is, enter the estimated cost if known. Again, if districts have that information, they have a plan, they can enter it. If not, that's okay, it wouldn't be required. And was there more than one building modernized? The answer is yes. You'd loop back, start answering the same questions over until you finally say no, and then you would go to the rest of the PIW that's already on the PIW. So that's the new stuff that we would be asking for. And so one of the main things that we were trying to get at was page 16, types of work. We wanted to make sure that that was a useful list, an adequate list.
Doesn't have Fred's item on there, but that's okay. Can we start on page 15 and do 15 and 16 together before we go back and do the like-kind building replacements? So I guess I would entertain comments or questions related to 15 and 16. Okay, so basic modernization of buildings or building on a campus. Are these the right questions? Are the scopes of work on 16 indicative of the types of work that are performed and illustrative in what we want? Do we need others there? So comments or questions from Eric?
When we started our conversation earlier, I kind of envisioned what we talked about on page 12 to really be a good chunk of the conversation we need to talk about for modernization. So I'm looking at pages 15 and 16. By the way, 16 could be substituting question number 4 on page 12.
Would you be able to get the cost for that too, or would you have the same issues that we talked about
like I
before?
said, the last comment I made was that I don't know if it's necessary to really break that out individually like that, as it is just knowing what the state and district contribution was on the total project cost, and this was the type of work that was actually performed. Again, we're trying to realize who our audience is and what they're going to need and what they're going to want to know. I think we have to look at this in baby steps. I think what we're trying to do is jump into this thing, trying to collect every bit of information we possibly can that I don't necessarily think is completely necessary at this point in time. There's a lot of questions, like number 10 really is what's being asked on page 12, question number 4. It's kind of duplicative in that respect. The total square footage of the building, sure, I guess we can try to find that out, but I just don't know what value that
Hold
has.
on.
No.
You have to have the total square footage of the building. You can't perform the most basic calculation regarding cost.
Our program is not based on square footage.
It doesn't matter. The industry, our industry, works on cost per square foot, dollars
If
per square
this
foot.
was the LPP, I would agree with you. But this is the SFP,
Well,
which is on a per pupil grant based on the
I
age of
understand
the
that.
building.
However, the funding is different than cost. We need cost information, and the industry standard for architects and engineers and contractors in our world is the cost per square foot. So we have to have the square footage. Whether it's the total square footage or the square footage modernized, you have to have that data.
I just think we need to be mindful of the fact that our program is not based on the industry standard.
Funding, costs. I understand that. And then as long as you have the number of pupils, you can tie it back to what was the cost per pupil versus the funding per pupil.
I think we have to also remember what is the purpose of this. The purpose was to identify what the program has accomplished.
Are we really trying to drive?
If that's what the purpose of this is about, there's no need to worry about the square footage of the work that was performed on a mod project. I can understand under new construction, but not under modernization. And so from that perspective, I have to ask, does the question that's being asked go to the purpose of this exercise? And if it cannot be answered to that point, it's unnecessary. And so I just want to go through these questions and ask, does it really relevant to the purpose that we're going through the exercise? And I would like us to go through that if it's possible.
Sure.
Okay.
So let me go. All right. So did you want to go through further comments on those items on page 15?
Well, I think number one's perfect question.
Well, okay. Actually, there's a whole universe of problems connected with question number one, because I'm not sure that they're really relevant to what we're talking about. But in school districts and on modernization projects, the name of the building and the designation of the buildings and the rooms is often incredibly confusing because the architects call them one thing. The districts call them another thing. Anyway.
And we only refer to them as...
Am I off base, or is this... I'm not off base, right?
And
this is actually a fairly complex area, but...
So when districts are filling out the PIW twice, wouldn't it be helpful to have what the name of the building was and maybe
we
even the
have to
square
have it,
footage
Brian. Nobody's
to help
debating
identify?
that. We need the name of the building.
Okay.
What we lack, is there is no standardized approach to reporting or identifying buildings and building names on our campuses, and so it's somewhat confusing in the big picture. That's all. Go ahead.
Just on that question alone, I think that's a good question. Basic identification of the building. But could we, just to get over that confusion, I guess maybe, I don't know who gets to think this through. I mean, you could spend hours on this thing, but is it better? I mean, you have to kind of decide as a district and as your program, and then maybe we're deciding as a state. Do you use the architect's designation? And if so, say it on here. Just tell us. Use architect's numbering on the plans, and then, or are you going to let us use our own? And I guess I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't know. I don't know because of the audience. Because if it's for the public, then they're not going to be able to know which building it is. If it's the building A, which doesn't match, the real building. Anyway, lots of problems. I agree.
Mr. Zian?
It's just a dumb question. Why can't the architects use the school district's designation? Because that's what it is.
DSA won't let them. Among other reasons. Well,
there's a reason for it?
Architects set it up. They go building A, B, C, D, E. So the school district calls it the old gym, McKinley Hall, whatever.
If I could help, Dave, this is the site diagram of the work we did, and it's building 1, building 2, building 3.
I got it.
It could be...
It's not a big issue.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm just trying to just make sure that everybody's aware that there is no standardized naming convention for buildings on school campuses in California, and even if there was, then everybody would complain about being in a straitjacket. So, I mean, I think the district is going to fill this out, so the district will put in whatever building identifier they want.
But it loses value, though, if we're inconsistent. What if you just use the arbitrary number that DSA requires or the architect requires, but can we just slash and then the actual real name, so you have both? So you have a decoder ring to get to it? I know it's confusing even there, but
Mr. Bach,
got to be able to.
This is your favorite question, so let's.
Yeah. For a mod project, what I ask you, what value is telling you what the building name is? I mean, identifying the particular building. What is the next step? I tell you the building. I tell you the building name. The mod's being done. What's the next step? Right? What are you going to use that information to determine? Is it to determine, okay, that building on that site was modernized? Well, you already know that because we filed a mod application to do that. Well, actually, I take it back.
Identify the building.
You don't identify the building. We can, but I don't necessarily think we do it. But I mean, is that what you want us to go back and recreate history? I mean, is that helping us understand what we accomplished?
No. We have to have,
I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, I think on the most fundamental level, we have to have something that identifies where the work was performed.
The school site's a good start.
Yeah, we got that part. That's already been input.
Well, that name can change too.
Well, it can. So I'm just trying to get a better sense as to what, other than trying to ask for everything we can possibly think of, what is it that we're trying to get by asking these questions? And I don't, if we can't answer that question here today, then I wonder the validity in needing to ask the question.
Well, I guess so in the big picture here, if you walk away from the discussion that we just had for 2 hours about page 12, and you focus on the descriptors of the information, we're going to describe the scope of work that we did. I think that as someone who, I think we want to know if there were multiple buildings involved. I mean, in many cases, this is going to be a single building on a small school site, and it's going to be a no-brainer. On a high school that's been built up over time that has 30 buildings on it, I mean, it gets sometimes a little more complex. But you certainly need to be able to identify where the work was performed. I only raised the issue of naming conventions because it is an issue in the field. And long term, what this does for us as a state is helps to feed back information when we perform facility condition assessments on these buildings. We will have buildings identified, and that feedback loop about work performed will inform the assessment of the condition of the buildings after the work's performed. Yes. Nope.
I fell off the turnip truck a while back because I don't know
you
where.
You only have one building?
We were having enough difficulty describing what was happening on the modernization, and now we're going to magnify that by doing it on a per building basis. And I've got to tell you what's going on in a toilet room versus
building.
It could be a building with just
standalone
toilets.
Toilet room, a toilet building then.
So I guess if you want to get at that square footage cost, why aren't you doing it on the size of the modernization? Which is difficult enough if you're doing an ADA compliance only project that could go over the whole campus. It's going to be very hard to assign a square footage cost to that to begin with. But why you guys have lost me when we started breaking it down on a per building basis. That's so difficult, and I don't know how that information would be meaningful in the future. By the time you ever get around to cross-referencing old data with new data, the building names are going to be changed. And as Fred mentioned, even the whole campus names change.
Can I talk about why we're asking this?
Yes, sir.
Real quick.
Please help me out here, will you, Brian?
That might help us answer the question.
As I mentioned when we started going through this slide, districts can use whatever naming convention they want because it's not really relevant to trying to use it for some other databases or anything like that at this point. Could be in the future, but right now, when you are filling out a worksheet online, you have to have an identifier. So if that's left blank, the computer will just give it number 1. And all the information asked about that building relates to that identifier. So the idea was, and we threw out some examples to show how varied it can be, C-101, Elm, Jim, is so that when you have, when you say, I'm completing information for a building, okay? Now I'm going to complete information for another building. It needs to know that it's a different building. And so you just give it an identifier. It can be whatever you want, and it's irrelevant except to track which building you're answering the questions for. I think it could be useful for the district when they fill out the final PIW to pull up and go, okay, last time we did it based on building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whether the naming convention has changed or not is kind of irrelevant. You'll be able to track by square footage or some of the other identifiers exactly which building you're talking about. But you have to have something that identifies which building you mean when you enter the data. And that's all it is just an identifier. It's the same reason for having an application number. There's no difference, not that it would be used for anything other than, so when you say 10,000 square feet, you mean this building. Okay. Not that it would be related to a school site that we would start pulling up the maps and try to correlate. That's not the purpose at all. It really is just so that which building do you mean?
I
So you
think,
can keep track
I
of it.
think that for me, if we didn't ask the question about, if we're asking for information about buildings, that's really what's at the root of this discussion, I think, partly. But if you're asking for information about buildings, you have to have an identifier. If you didn't have one, you couldn't do it using the technology that we have. So we can entertain questions about why we're doing this on a building basis. That was which Mr. Hanson raised earlier. But okay, Lee.
Thank you, Bill. That's what I would like to do, is get back to the purpose of it. But because really, okay, you've mentioned the facility conditions index. So if that's going to be the end game of this, I think we should just say that and work towards that. And if that's the case, then we do have to have a very standardized way. A school district needs to think, and I don't think it needs to be by the whole state. School district needs to think very long and hard about how they're going to identify this from here on out. Because if it's going to tie back to the facility condition index, it does need to be standard. I mean, and the application thing, Brian, with all due respect, how many years have we been talking about the fact that DSA has a different tracking number than OPSC, which has a different number than another agency? I mean, it is a very important thing, and it is important. And I want you guys to have the identifier on the building, but it's not standard. I'd love it to just make it standard. For this purpose, for the state program, whatever form it's going to be in, we have had enough problem with it over the years. And if that's where we're going with it, Bill, we should say it.
Well, I don't think that there's any official direction that that's where we're going.
That wasn't where we were
this
going
is-
when we came up with this.
No, and I wasn't representing that OPSC said that. But as someone who is looking ahead to the future, I think it's clear that there's a potential for this program, and multiple other states in the nation are developing and have developed facilities condition assessments and indices that they use to prioritize funding. And part of the exercise of being involved in doing that is that unfortunately you have to input a lot of data that's a lot like what we're talking about here today. And there's so welcome to the new world, I guess, on some level.
I'm fighting it, and I don't like it, but I think we're being dragged into it. I recognize I like data. I just don't. I don't think it's going to be that accurate. But you just throw it out there. It's what it's going to be. There it's going to be. But again, the question is a very important question, and I guess I would like more. I don't know. I'm trying to think this through. Would I like you guys to tell us, use the architect's convention, use the building number, or would I like to be able to decide on my own? And I don't know, but that's maybe something to think about
Okay.
as far as standardization is concerned.
Now, okay, so at this rate, we're going to be here. No, just kidding. Any further comments on building name? Hearing none. Building 2. But what is the building used for? So And question 2, I'm sorry. Brian, so that goes back to the drop-down box that's both on 13 and 14?
Yeah, is it a admin, cafeteria, classrooms, gym, kitchen, library, NPR, performing arts, restrooms, and our favorite, other?
Uh-huh. And this is comparable to page 2 of the existing PIW where there's a, if you look on the left bottom left side, you check. And on the existing PIW, you also insert the square footage of each of those buildings. But anyway.
And, this is just the list of everything that we could think of. If there's more relevant ones, we can add to it. That's
Comments
what
on
we're here
the
for.
building list? Similar to what's on the current PIW, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just Bill. I guess I struggle. I mean, with the value. I mean, I guess I want to go through this and understand the point, and I'm still not quite sure I'm there, understanding what the point of asking on a per building basis is. I hear what you're saying about going forward and having a good basis and understanding of what work is being done, but we're no longer at the 10,000 foot level. We're right on the doorstep of the classroom building. And this is a far departure from where I think a lot of folks really want this to be at. Page 12 was at the 10,000 foot level, and I was there. I was comfortable with that. I'm sure we're going to go through this, but I'm to ask every time about the building for everything that we've done. I just think driving down to that level of detail is not something the legislature or the general public want. I mean, I don't even give them that information in my local district. I tell them basically a list of scope of projects that were completed at the school site, the amount of money I spent at the school site, how much money I got from the state, and which bonds were contributed to that project for the school site. I have a nice, pretty map to let them know specifically, what I did on a per building basis. But I mean, we are not even close to being, we're jumping in with both feet trying to capture everything. This took years to develop. And we're jumping out day one, minute one, asking for that level of information. We don't even have a structure by which we can capture this information. I just think we need to be mindful that we got to do this in baby steps.
Okay, so
Page 12 was step 1, and that was great.
Well, but we pretty much shredded page 12, but anyway.
I think we ended up with a good page 12 at the end of the day. I think it's a good thing.
Well,
I just think this is next year's question.
So what I'm hearing you say, what I'm hearing is that if you took the concept behind page 12, the concept behind page, not the cost concept, the per project concept. Is that what I'm hearing you say? On a site-wide basis. So let's go back to page 16 here, 15. So if you took that, you would, in question 1, I'm trying to do this on a site-wide basis because I still want some of this information. I think it's important for everyone. But anyway. So in question 1, instead of having it be per the individual building, you would list maybe how many buildings were modernized using this project on the site. Just as an example. I'm trying to get where you're going. Okay. And then you might list the number of classrooms modernized. We absolutely need, so on the whole project, right? So I'm trying to get there. You might list types of construction, stories. You might list the square footage of the total project modernized, and then you might list the scope that comes from the listing on the next page. That may be more than you even wanted to do, but I'm just trying to, if you took the concept of page 12, which was site-wide analysis of modernization, and put it into this, you'd list all of the buildings you modernized as part of it, as opposed to listing each one and going through this iterative process and doing the scope. Is that one way to interpret And that may be more than you want anyway, but
It is a lot more than I'd want to go. I mean, I see some value in the year the building was built, but on a school site basis, I've like in this one I'm looking at, I think they were built at 7 different times. Buildings were built, and
Sure.
added on over the course of the history of the building. I don't know if that helps you any. The number of classrooms that were part of the modernization project, I give you that now, but if I submit 3 same mod applications for the same building and the same classrooms, we still have the same issues we talked about, on page 12. Driving down to this level, I just don't see.
I mean,
If this is supposed to be a springboard into something else, that's a conversation we should have. If it is to drive down and figure out what we've accomplished with the program,
Yes.
and considering that this program was a site-specific grant where the money could be applied throughout the school site, that the eligibility that generated the money doesn't have to be applied to that building. I just don't see what value trying to tie it to the building is. If you want to springboard this into a facility condition index, or at least trying to get some.
that's not why we're here.
I know. But if you want a springboard to get some basic data about the individual buildings on a particular school site, we might as well just have that conversation now about a facility condition index. Sure. And I said it before, I think we should have that conversation because I think the state needs to have a plan, a long-term infrastructure plan for school facilities. We've lost our deferred maintenance program in the budget. Our M&O programs are just getting decimated. We need to have a really long-term plan about what we're doing, and we don't. And if we want to have an understanding of what we've accomplished and where we need to go, page 15 is a great way to start that conversation, but it should not be part of the first part of understanding what this program has accomplished. And so I'm just trying to make sure that I think we've got 2 separate issues that we need to deal with.
Sure. Well, and let me
not combine them together.
Dave wants to talk too, but I think part of, if you look at the bond accountability information that's presented by OPSC to the board, I think that if you look at some of the questions, some of the data points that are here, you can see how those would feed in. I think part of our goal is we want to provide the same level of bond accountability for modernization and for other programs as we are for the new construction. So right now, what's a good example of something that gets presented to the board is numbers of classrooms modernized by region of the state, number of square feet of buildings modernized, number of schools modernized even by the state, modernization dollars spent by region. These are typical reports, I'm extrapolating from the new construction reports, that OPSC presents to the board that are part of the bond accountability that are on the website so that anyone can go and look. And so I think having the data that's in here, in addition to the overall cost data from page 1, is what drives the ability to present those bond accountability reports. That's really why we're here, is for bond accountability reasons and to understand the work that's been performed in the program and to report on it.
And I think bond accountability is appropriate. I think we're in an era and a time where it's necessary and needed, and we got to do everything we can to ensure that the state's bonds and the local bonds are being spent wisely and appropriately, and where in which we've applied for them, they're being spent the way in which we asked for them. I just think telling the legislature and telling the public that I modernized Building 2 is useless information. What they want to know is that I replaced the roof on this school site that was leaking. And I'm trying to figure out how telling you what I did on Building 2 versus telling you I spent $2 million re-roofing or plumbing or whatever.
Okay, and I
just think it's driving too far.
Okay, and your basic point, if I'm extrapolating it correctly, is you are not in favor of doing a per building approach, but a site-wide approach or application-wide approach, whatever. In other words, if you modernize a site, you're saying we don't need to drill down into each of the buildings and define the scope for each building. You're saying as long as we knew what buildings are done, and the square footage, and you could list the scope then for the whole project, and then boom, you have enough information.
On a site basis, I honestly think we can stop on page 12.
Well, but page 12 is really focused on individual costs for data points. It's focused on taking what you answer in question 10 on this page and putting a cost to it. So I don't think that's what you
Sounds
mean.
right. No, I think that, I mean, from the purpose, I mean, the first page of the PIW already asked you a lot of information about the project cost,
Right.
the project funding, the school site, who's being served. It provides you a lot of information, a lot of things that you rattled off with respect to the new construction PIW. It's going to provide you the same level of reporting.
Exactly.
What's already on the page 1 of the PIW. Then you just drill it down a little bit on the type of work performed by that, well, actually, I think better served is what's on page 16 of 18, under question number 4 on page 12. I think you can figure that, and maybe if you want to, know the age of the buildings, I guess. I mean, that's probably useful. I disagree on the total square footage, but the rest of the information on a per building basis.
It's interesting because as somebody who analyzes the data, the only number that's useful is the square footage and the cost.
Not under
Sorry.
the SFP, though.
It is in the world.
I agree. And in the real world, square footage is what counts. But we're talking about how has the SFP...
Or number of pupils in cost. Then you can get the number of the state and local shares per.
And of course, using your point, we all know that the pupil grant is not the number of pupils, doesn't really calculate well on what's actually needed in the facility. There's a disconnect there, too. I just think that mod's a whole other beast than new construction.
Okay.
And I don't think you can simply apply one aspect and approach to this at all.
Sure. Okay. Mr. Zian has waited patiently.
Just real quickly, Eric, I think I hear your comments. They're good comments, but if you stop short on 12, and I don't think you're even advocating ever having any specific building-by-building data, and I think that's really where we're kind of reaching a loggerhead here, is getting specific data on that. And all we're trying to do here is, again, tell the taxpayers and other decision makers what we spent, modernization dollars on a specific project. And I would submit to you that without building specific data, you don't know what buildings on a site were done. If you just have, page 12 is just aggregate data. And so if it says we did HVAC and we did roofing, and just stop there, you don't know if there's 20 buildings on there. That's very misleading. No one is going to know, all 20 buildings are done, or maybe only one building was done on that site. And that's why we feel we need the building-specific data and the types of work done in each building. So you have enough granularity in the data to have some frame of reference, some useful information. So I hear what you're saying. We're trying to make it useful. We're trying to make it simple and not create a big process here. But that's why you need it per building. So I don't know, Brian, if you want to add more.
Just that last month we presented a couple different ways to capture the same basic information, and one of the ideas was versus scope of work. And what we heard, though, is that most districts look at it, track the work per building. So that's why we presented it this way. It was based on that. We had two different ways last time. We were trying to move forward to give districts more options, more flexibility, but there seemed to be, because I remember I asked several times, well, which one works better? And I think the answer to just about everybody who did answer, which wasn't everyone, was, well, per building makes more sense to us. So that's why we came up with this right here. And I think the goal is just to say, well, number one, if we want to throw out number one, we can.
No.
Because the computer will just give it a number anyways. So it's really immaterial.
Yeah. Well.
Number two, to be able, districts have been saying, well, yeah, you did HVAC, and you did roof, and you did all of these other works, but that doesn't give you any idea about the scope of HVAC. Maybe you only did one HVAC. It's part of the scope, but it was a $50 million project and such a small part. What about all these other things that we did? Don't you want to show, like Dave was saying, that granularity? So that's the goal. I'm not saying we got there, but that's the goal and the genesis of saying, okay, of the buildings that you did, What's the square footage? How old is it? What are the types of things that you did for that? Last time, we tried to drill down even further and say, okay, of the HVAC, how much of that building was impacted by that, and all of these other things. And that was just way too much information, and we completely agree with that. So we have scaled that back considerably. So what we envision is to be able to say, Building 4 was built in 1963. It's a 10,000 square foot building. Roofing and HVAC was done. Building 6, built in I want to make sure I don't have a 5-year-old building. Built in 19 whatever.
They're not there yet.
There was carpentry done. There was the carpets were replaced. There was also some painting. Okay, any other buildings, and that would be the level of detail that we would be capturing from this. That's the end goal. So we can talk about that, but that's the entire mindset of what we had when we came up with these questions, based on we were told that most districts track it per building anyways, and so this is something that generally is available. To drill down with the actual costs is a whole other discussion that we're definitely pulling back from. To drill down exact type, scope of work, the scale of each scope, definitely pulling back from, but you did HVAC on Building 12. Okay, thank you. That's pretty much where we're at.
Can we get some comments from other members of the committee? Lee?
Bill and Brian, I guess, okay, so I'm thinking about the reporting that has been done, and like the Center for Cities and Schools report and things like that, and it's way up here. Even Lisa says we've spent $35 billion on, and she didn't say on how many classrooms even, or buildings, or schools. I mean, it's way up here. So I know that modernization, I'm just trying to think this through, of modernization's different. So if you wanted to be able to say, with the state program, we modernized X number of classrooms that were X years old, or were more than 30 years old, more than 50 years old, more than 60 years old. You would have to have it by building because, like Eric said, many schools are built, the bigger schools especially, in different phases, and to get that accurate. But that's about it. I mean, I can't think of why else you would want it by building. It's just that little sentence of we modernized X number of classrooms that are so many years old. Is that? Do you see that? Anything else that, or maybe by square footage? You've got this cost per square footage,
the number of
per
students.
square foot, the number of students in so many years old.
So we modernized 10,000 classrooms serving 250,000 students.
So you don't need it by building.
I do that
with
right.
that.
25,000.
You don't need it by building to report that.
Well,
Not necessarily. I don't
Right.
disagree.
your math doesn't really count since, as Eric talked, there's going to be overlap and double counting and just Jim's done. So you're free to do the math as you
Want, if you so wish, yeah.
I'm calling it arithmetic after President Clinton. But I think that, I mean, the issue of double counting, I do think it's multiple PIWs, if they clearly indicate the name of the the name of the school for modernization, I think can be correlated and put into the database so that the information is not double counted. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Odell. I mean, I think that when you set up a database, you can certainly structure it so that if you have multiple applications, so if LA Unified does all their roof on one job, they do this horizontal integration, don't do a vertically integrated project system, they do horizontally integrated, so they do 6 projects on the same campus. As long as we had correct identifiers, we should be able to set up a database that didn't double count those, correct?
I would think so. You have the app number or something like that, but exactly how you would accomplish that would really depend on the questions that you're going to ask, which is
what we're talking about today.
What we're talking about here. So exactly how we would, avoid some of the traps that we're talking about, we're certainly sensitive to that, but I think we got to get through this stuff before we can talk about, okay, so now that you have this worksheet, how do you make sure you don't double count? That's, I think, later on in the process. Right now we need to know what are the appropriate questions, what challenges will districts have in completing it.
Okay, so and what we've heard is that there's a fundamental question on the table about per building or by site. So let's park that for a second. And can we get other comments from members of the committee? Or if you have none, we'll take that as a rousing affirmation. Oh, no, I was trying to see if you were listening, Mr. Dixon. Any further comments on this? Page 15, we're talking about, these are, the way they're formatted here is a by building question. Let's leave aside the by building or by site for a minute, but in terms of the specific questions and the usefulness of the questions in developing data and reporting and bond accountability. So can we have, Yes, sir.
I just think we have to recall where we came from. We haven't asked any questions about modernization, and now we're starting to ask questions about modernization. Let's keep it on the site level. Breaking it down by building is impossible. If you calculate the amount of labor hours that the districts are going to have to go through to fill out this form, and the bogging down of the whole school facilities program, it's that type of information should be reported to the board also.
Okay. And Bill, if I can I talk again?
Sir, you're ready to be, your 25 years is up. You can.
Thank you. Second round modernization.
Yeah.
We also have to be mindful of the fact that, the process that we're talking about and the timing of the next bond, if it's going to be used for that purpose, is really a narrow window. 2014 is really around the corner. We have to put through the regulations on this. It's going to take 5 to 6 months. It's going to be subject to the next bond issuance. Supposedly there's one supposed to be in the fall. The next one will be in the spring. So this would apply to those in the spring. So we're now into May, June, maybe July, who knows? So we don't have control over that. So that by the time you start collecting your data, the new bond is going to be already drafted in legislation. So if we do a June election, the window of opportunity to collect this data and the time it's going to take to fill out all of this, the amount of information you can get is going to be limited. If you want to basically have a true understanding of what the program has accomplished, you just need to settle with the aggregate and recognize how successful that program has been on a site basis. You don't have time to drive down to this level. You absolutely do not. And I'd want you to be considerate of that, because if you want us as a school district to spend the time, it's going to take time to do this. It won't take us that much time to do the other. But this will take us time to get down and drill down to what you need. And I really think you'd be smart to do this in 2 steps. Do the first one we talked about that I thought we had general agreement about, that would be focused on mod and at the 10,000-foot level. Page 12. Then once we get a good base and a good understanding, then start driving down into this building stuff. You're trying to do it all at once in the limited time we have to have any value for the period that we're talking about. I just think you just need to be mindful of that.
I think that's some good points, Eric. So just to make sure I understand, so because of this narrow window, you're saying that these types of questions would be better served for the next program and not captured under SFP at all, because of the timing of all those other issues that you brought up?
I'm not saying these questions are horrible questions. I think these are very good questions. I just don't think this is the right point in time to be asking these questions.
That it shouldn't be for SFP mod, it should be for another bond, whether it's a program or whatever the future holds, which we can't predict.
But the bond permits, the next bond permits, and I have no idea what that's going to look like.
Right? No, you're not making a recommendation for the next bond. I realize the way
don't.
I asked that was not really a fair question. I just meant that if this was going to be captured, you're saying it should be in the future, even if it means that you wouldn't be able to capture anything for SFP mod.
If this is the direction the state wants to go in capturing this level of data, we should talk about trying to capture it at the time at which we're submitting our funding applications, so that you have it on an ongoing basis, as opposed to trying to chase it retroactively, which is what we're trying to do right now. So I'm just thinking right now, in the period of time we have and what we're trying to accomplish, I think we just have to be kind of more strategic about how we go about trying to capture the information. I support the questions that you're asking here on 15. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of these questions that you're asking. It's just the time in which you're asking them and the application that will be asked is a bit of a challenge. And I just think we should be cautious.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of the timing issues are a little bit daunting, but I do think that, I think this is, if you really look at where we are in California, sorry, I get a moment on the soapbox here, we haven't really collected very good data on what we've done in school facilities, and we have a lot of different agencies that have their own pots of data and their own silos and their own computer systems that don't talk to each other. This is an opportunity to continue the process of trying to understand what we're doing, trying to get districts and the state used to working together, districts reporting in a way that can be useful and that can be part of bond accountability, and the state, understanding the data and helping to use it to go forward. So, I think there's some value in this exercise that's independent of where we are in the program, although I think where we are in the program certainly influences the way people feel about what we're being asked to do at school districts and even at the state. We're in a time where the current program is winding down, and so that raises a lot of issues related to the energy level, the ability of districts and staffs, I guess, to do this. But it's an important piece because we haven't had any real reporting other than the application processes, which I understand are daunting, believe me. But the back-end reporting of actual costs and work performed has been almost non-existent from school districts, and it's a damn shame. Yes, ma'am.
Bill, have you folks have looked at what other states are doing as far as data collection, right?
Somewhat. Somewhat.
So do they collect on a line like the scope? Cost information per type of scope?
Many states do.
They do?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm wondering if their laws are the same as far as bidding and public contract code and things like that?
Differential laws,
Yeah.
not always subject to Field Act, different requirements per state. You have to
And
look at
bidding
each one
procedures
separately.
are different, yeah.
Yeah, it's
So-
not cookie cutter.
Okay, so that, I think that, I keep hearing you guys want some kind of cost information by type of work, and, okay, I think we still have a lot of work to do trying to figure that out. I'm wondering if, I like Eric's thing about a two-step process, baby steps, and the timing, wondering if we do move forward on page 12, the basic information, and give districts incentive, something, I don't know what it is, if they would like to start filling the rest of it out, because then you could have a little test, pilot tests on that and see, and then they could give you input on whether that was hard, whether it took a lot of time, and just kind of get a little sampling. If the district, if it's a one-y, somebody has one project and says, yeah, sure, I'll try to fill that out for you, and it's voluntary. And then you can, and try to test it out a little bit. And it's not all the data, but at least
Sure.
you're getting page 12. You're getting the basic stuff and get that through, and you start collecting that.
So I guess I'd propose something different, trying to respond to the concerns that we're hearing here, which the information on page 12, if you take the cost away, is not adequate to provide any kind of foundational analysis for modernization work. I would propose, if you may, that we might ask staff to take page 15 and modify it, look at how you would structure page 15 if it was a site-wide input. So, I do in a second. Just so the question 1, you would list the number of buildings you did, and question 2, you'd go through the descriptors of the buildings, just like we do on the current PIW. You'd enter the square footage, age of the building, and then you'd click on the types of work done, and you're done.
Would we know what kind of building it is, whether it's a classroom?
Yes.
Would
yeah.
we know how many stories?
That's
or-
information that we collect now on the PIW that we're used to inputting.
Okay.
We're talking about basic project information from the site level.
Would we want to know, like, how many buildings had the HVAC, or just know that there was HVAC done on that site, even if it was one or a complete HVAC replacement? I mean, that's kind of our thought process.
Yeah,
you know.
I understand that it is. I think we're trying to, I'm just trying to come up with a way that we could incorporate the concerns that we're hearing today, and still have useful data that we could analyze. And I think it's page 12 or whatever it was, is not enough information. But page 15, if you did it by site-wide basis, is almost exactly comparable to what districts answer now on page 2 of the PIW. So you put in the type, the square footage, the type of building, the number of pupils served, and we know the scope is a new construction project, but in this case, you'd then click a box for the overall scope of work performed. It doesn't get you down to the level of saying, was there HVAC in buildings 5 or 7? I'm just trying to respond to what we're hearing here about the concerns. It would give, I think, we have to have the square footage, we have to have the number of students, we need the number of buildings, and we need the types of buildings for bond accountability purposes, and the scope of work then is indicative and could be used for further analysis. Yes?
Just real quickly, Bill, point of clarification. So on page 15, when you say, look at this from a site perspective, all the buildings on the site that were modernized? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Just unclear?
So under number 1, you would click names, buildings modernized, right? And you'd click off building 1, old gym, multi-purpose, or something like that, so that you knew which buildings were modernized on the site.
Only the buildings modernized.
That's correct.
Yes.
And so then you'd go through and put in the square footage and the number of classrooms modernized, year built, total square footage, et cetera, number of stories, that kind of stuff. And then you'd get the scope box, click down, and you could click off the scope that you performed. So if you just did a roofing project, you'd have all the buildings listed there. You click off roofing, and you would know that it was just a roofing project.
Would you have the square footage for that too then? I thought I heard you said.
You'd have the square
total
footage of the
buildings.
buildings.
The only reason
I'm not sure
keep
we can
asking
solve this
that
sitting right here, right now, but
is because that's a unique thing to each building. So I'm just trying to see how, because we're thinking site-wide, but then per building would drill down to, you'd have to collect some data for each building. It may be in a different place. It may be easier to get. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just trying to get a picture of.
The way that it's done on page 2 right now, if you look at on page 2 of the existing PIW, if you look at page 8 of 18 in the handout, you list the buildings there, classroom building, multi-purpose, whatever, and you put the square footage in there, and you list the number of classrooms right in that chart. And you could do something similar to that. So this is a site-wide aggregate. I'm just trying to come up with
I think it's very similar to our per scope
What's that?
proposal from last month, what you were describing. And that would be fine because most of it's already done. So absolutely. I'm not going to argue.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, really, because the dollar value on 12, we left off on, it was on a per-site basis, so collecting square footage on a per-site basis would need to be done anyway to compare the numbers.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
then,
I'm
and then
not
the
sure we were
students are on
trying
a
to-
per-site basis also.
Yeah, the idea, and we're going to look at page 12, but the idea is that there wouldn't be a one-to-one relationship, that you'd collect it on a per site, it would be known it was per site, but you're not going to be able to take that out and then drill it down to the other more detailed stuff we have. We wanted to keep it separate. We knew it would be apples and oranges, and so we weren't going to try to sync it up. So,
In case you're getting hungry, we're going to go till 12:30, okay? And try and work this out. So actually, we're going to stay here until you agree. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Is that okay with everybody if we just work through till 12:30? And I think we've gotten enough input from today and be done. Is that okay?
This will be my last input.
Yes, sir. Excellent. Let me write this down.
Yeah, they make a special note.
Well, I still think it would be very important to go out to a school district or two and get a feel for what's really going on. And remember, California has 10,000 schools, and we talk about what other states do. That's apples to oranges too, right? Mm-hmm. We have a lot. We're a big state with a lot of 1/8 of all the people in the United States are in California. So it's Fred's doing the math on that, checking me in. Fact check. But anyway, but you know, if OPSC really wants to move forward with this, then I think you need to go out to the practitioners and see what it looks like. You know, I think that'd be real important.
Thank you. That's a good.
I'll
and
find it small if you'll be one of the other volunteers, Joe.
Well, yeah, if you can travel to Southern California, you know, when it's raining up here and you want to come down to Paradise, just let me know.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
The OC, Ron, come on.
all right, further comments? Are there any comments from the audience, the public? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Richard Gonzalez and Associates. On question number 7, where you ask about buildings being previously modernized, there are a lot of cases where, I know of some cases where they're only doing like the bathroom in that one building, or all the bathrooms in that building, but not touching anything else. That doesn't mean the building's been modernized. Or if they've just done the HVAC, doesn't mean the building's been modernized. That means money has been spent in it. But that's one issue. The other is, do you want it the date that the state funded modernization on this project, or any kind of modernization work was done here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Brian, remind us, the reason we asked this question is to try and understand sort of the history, if you will, or what's the...
Concern was raised at last month's IMP that part of, if you want to talk about the scope involved, and we even mentioned it this morning, or it was mentioned this morning, that if you have an older building, to say you did an HVAC is not the same as if it's a much more newer building. So concern was expressed, and we were trying to respond to that, to talk about, well, how old is the building? We know that's going to drive up costs. We're not trying to ask for the actual cost of the amount, but just to get a general sense of the fact that you have a 50-year-old building to do some mod work is going to be a lot more expensive than if it's a newer building. I think we were trying to look at the last time it was modernized with state or local, but the point about how much it was modernized, that's a good point. I don't think we've considered that, so we'll have to think about that part.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so do we think it's possible to do an adaptation of the flow and questions that are shown on page 15 for a site-wide as part of what we come up with? I mean, what do you see as the issues, Brian?
Well, the first question I have is on page 16, the types of work, just to throw it out there. Want to make sure we have a complete list. We don't have stuff that's extra. So if, I know 12:30 is getting close, so if anyone has any suggestions, maybe not today, they could email me or Michael Watanabe and let us know if there could be any revisions. I think that would be really helpful, because thinking about changes and looking at it per site, we definitely can take a look at that. What all the issues would be, not sure, but again, it gets down to exactly what questions are, and that's why I was harping on the per square footage. Not that it would be a problem, but that would be something we would have to account for and try to understand to make sure it makes sense.
Okay. I mean, go ahead.
There is one that I think is important to add, and that's technology. A lot of modernizations include technological upgrades. Yeah.
Water. Okay. Thank you.
So how would we typify that, Dennis? How would you? Because
technology upgrades.
Technology upgrades.
I don't know, something like that. Is that all right?
Because it could be.
Yeah, you could have things like adding voice over IP, adding smart boards, data connections, all those type of things.
Yeah. Keep it at the high level here. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say I think most people were in agreement that the page 16 list was much more manageable than the page 4, or I mean, page 12,
Okay.
Item number 4
Okay.
list.
All right. Thanks. That's helpful.
Fred, nothing on educational enhancement? Okay, I'll take that as a rousing endorsement. Well, I mean, we had it on there previously. We took it off, and we took it off because, remind me.
Well, we,
Because everything is educational enhancement.
Yeah, I got that part. Okay.
Interior configurations or changes in spaces.
Come up with a better word.
Changes in spaces or something like that, because
Agree.
educational enhancement would include, you're going to, all of these.
I know, I understand
Yeah,
that. So,
right.
but, I mean, so the typical educational reconfiguration that we would have performed if I was at a school district would have been, or the most obvious one, is turning the wood shop into the computer lab. Class convert? I don't know, is it,
We're converting classrooms into learning centers,
reconfiguration?
configuration.
That covers a lot.
But isn't that work involved in that included in these other categories?
It is.
It is, but
Subcategories,
we're not,
like 88.
we're not, this isn't about cost, this is just descriptors of the work. So we have,
yeah.
Richard, did you have a comment on this?
Yes, just, the work that I've seen done for educational purposes have been technology and interior reconfigurations, just like you described, Jim, to a couple classrooms. But that's all covered either under a technology listing that you've added, and building interior, wall systems, floorings, caseworks, all of that's in there. I don't know that we need to have another one otherwise.
Okay, I was trying to be respectful of our participation of the California Department of Education in our process here.
Oh, yeah, we.
And that would be where they would.
That, Bill. Not that this precludes further comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I was going to say that educational enhancement or improvement is a reason why you're doing
Why you do
something,
it.
but this is
Sure.
actual trade. This is actual work. So you might, I mean, it's a different kind of classification altogether. Because it might, I would say, infrastructure upgrade, educational enhancement.
We've
You know,
got-
those are two different. That's the kind of classification that is, not this work type
So
of work.
the best one I've heard so far was interior reconfiguration. Or just reconfiguration? So anyway, let's take that under advisement. So, I mean, I think it's certainly something that a lot of money gets spent on. I understand that it includes all the other things that are already on here, but there's certainly a lot of, and it's an interesting thing to know when you're thinking about what it costs to do schools and what you do.
And maybe it could be a narrative more than a qualitative, that, you know, what.
Other?
If you converted to SLCs and you made some administrative changes, maybe that's, gives you a further scope of what went on than.
Like maybe just a different question, a different box in the flow chart, and just an opportunity to provide it, but not a requirement.
Well, like when we ask on our form, you know, what's the programming and the other pieces being addressed in the modernization, and it could be that they're converting Lincoln High School into 4 small learning communities, so we changed out a classroom into an administrative annex, we did this, we did that, but those all include these things.
Okay.
So I think it's probably more worthy of a narrative, but if you want, yeah, can't add that up.
So we've given OPSC clear direction. Feedback from the field. Thank you, Brian, for listening and for being such a good troop.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
It's going to go somewhere.
Yeah, he is. So, thanks everybody for coming, and assuming there's no further comments, we'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting. Thanks so much.